most people don't realise that it was the English that stopped slavery, and it was a guy called Granville Sharp. There was a very famous case called the Somerset case, 22nd of June, 1772. And basically, there had already been an earlier ruling by a Chief Justice in England called Sir John Holt, and he had already coined the phrase that English air is too pure for any slave to breathe. You must free the black, right? And what was happening was black people in the colonies was getting back to England because they knew that in England they were not allowed to be slaves. Our common law forbid it. Mm-hmm. In fact, if you go back all the way to the 600s, the year 600s, if you was to sell a villager into slavery, your forfeit was your weight in gold, right? So at the end of the day, there was always laws there to protect against slavery. It is different to the villainy and the lord set up and serfs in that sense, right? Push this forward, what happened, that case, the Somerset case, the unintended consequence of that case, which, and by the way, Granville Sharp was an Englishman, he was white, he was working class, he was a tradesman, and guess what, people? He was a layman in law. And yet he brought the people together. He found slavery abhorrent. He helped the blacks. There was about 15,000 blacks who had made their way to this country, right? Meaning England. And they were freed, basically. As soon as your feet touch English, you are no longer a slave, right? And then they don't teach you about this history because they don't want you to know. This guy, Granville Sharp, has actually got in the African Museum in London a plaque to his name. He's actually buried in Fulham in London. There's a tomb where he's buried. He was the one. Now, the unintended consequence is over the next 80 years, that case was being used in America.
As a precedent.
Now, it had set a precedent.
Yeah.
Mansfield took 3 terms to give his judgment, kept getting in touch with the slavers, who one of them just happened to be a British barrister, right? Kept getting in touch with the slavers and saying, you don't want to do this. I think you should just let the slave go, basically, because there's potential that my judgment is not going to be what you're looking for, right? And they carried on. They insisted that this Somerset was their slave, right? And the judge made a ruling, and the ruling was free the black. Now, Granville Sharp chased the ship that tried to take him away, used habeas corpus as a writ from the English courts to get him off the ship. He was strapped with his hands behind the mast. They took him off the strip and took him back into London. Now, the point of all of this is we have been vilified as racists when we are the people that stopped slavery, not the British. The British wanted to carry on. People don't realise there was 2 elements to what was going on. There was English law, which was English common law, but the colonies, which were being controlled by the British, the British establishment, they had colonial law. And it was the colonial law that was clashing with the English common law. And in the end, the English common law said, we're not having this anymore. You can't do it. Right. And that is, again, after some time, I believe about 80 years, in the end, there was a civil war in 1860, which basically freed the slaves. But what you had was loyalists in America to the British Crown that wanted to continue with slavery. And you had, if you like, English constitutionalists that didn't want to do that.
So would you say that the British, then, we could maybe define them as the City of London bankers and Bank of England, which was created to create fractional reserve banking? Is it that group? Is it that, colonialist empire that are the British rather than, because we need to, I think the definition is really important. Who are they? Is it the City of London?
Well, they're not me and you, put it that way. So what you've got is a group of people, over centuries, their families have built up wealth. They have become the elites. They see us as slaves, and whether we have got chains on our ankles, our feet, or whatever it is to become a slave, and whether you be black, white, brown, or yellow, yeah, don't care, and they have created a form of enslavement via debt, right? If you go back to the original Magna Carta, right, it doesn't say in the original Magna Carta that it mentions the City of London and their financial rights and privileges. But what the Magna Carta does is say those rights should be extended to all towns, villages, and cities throughout England.
Right.
Who has taken that away from you? The British. Because every county in England should have its own bank. You should have one in Lancashire.
Because that protection for the City of London that's in the Magna Carta, isn't that one of the few articles that remain on the statute books, that specific one?
Not only is that correct, and we're not worried about the statute book, because if the British have repealed something, there's a simple way of solving all of this, and you void the Acts of Union. What give the British their power, right? It was the Acts of Union of 1706 and 1707. That's what created a British Parliament, right? All we do is void that. And then people say, but you're destroying the Union. And you say, no, you're not, because the unification of the Crown is left intact, because that happened in 1603. What you're doing is doing the same as what the Russians did and said, we will not stand for a Soviet state anymore. You will not control the Russians. You will not control the Ukrainians. You will not control with your way of doing things. And that's what so the British were the people who installed the Soviet Union and as it was. Let me just explain something else to people, because I think people don't realise this. I'm English. Go and have a look at the British Nationality Act of 1981, right? Mm-hmm. It tells you, by law, you are now British. They have illegally removed your identity as an Englishman and a Scotsman and an Irishman and a Welshman.